Hey everybody, welcome to Obscurities in Miniatures, and it's Friday once more, which means we bring to you yet another obscurity in literature. And today's piece of text is one of my favorites, and honestly and truly one of my go-to games. This book and its predecessor, the multitude of PDF printouts that I've had, is For Against Darkness from Ganesha Games by the ever busy Andreas Filiogi, if I'm saying his name correctly. But this book, and actually the many authors that have also contributed to this game, but we're going to start with the granddaddy of the whole subset of them. And I know there's many that came before, and there's probably a lot more of these types of games that are going to come after, but this has been one of my favorite. Essentially, as it says on the cover, it is a solitaire dungeon delving pen and paper game. You are going to be making maps. Let me tell you that right now. And you are going to be rolling a lot of dice. But if you grew up with those types of games, I think you're going to get a lot of bang for your buck with this little book. You can see my copy is getting quite dog-eared. And as I said, I have printed a multitude of sets of the PDFs over time. I have a copy sitting in Japan with a little cheap Daiso notebook that I did all my little cartography in with all the various maps and characters. But what this book is really just a nice framework to get you started with how to play the game. And what's cool is, as a system, it works great. And there's already been a whole bunch of reskins available, and we'll talk about some of those. And there's just a ton of add-ons and extra stuff that you can add to your game if that is what you like. So we have the basic classes, of which we have, like, I don't know, at least six in the base book. We have the various equipment, not a whole lot to look at, but, and then in the original book at least, we have just a very simple way of setting up your weapons. You either have crushing or slashing weapons. It's whatever your heart desires. We have the basic rules. Like I said, there's going to be a lot of dice rolling, if I remember correctly, because I have so many of these various sub-games. I want to say some of them, the monsters hit automatically, and you're rolling in defense, whereas obviously you're rolling for attacks and anytime you're fighting. Then we get into, so the cool thing is here, everything is totally randomized, and if you're into games like Shadows of Brimstone, things like that, there's going to be all sorts of fun little setups. Now, there's been all kinds of peripherals, like you can get decks of cards I've seen made that have all of the various maps on there, so you don't even have to roll the dice if you want to really just bling out your game. Those are options. Like I said, I've always forgone the graph paper and just gone ahead and drawn my own maps. You have your basic map contents, and then from there we start getting into all of the various tables, and we let your imagination fill in what's happening there. If you grew up playing a lot of like the Fighting Fantasy, the Steve Jackson game books, any of that stuff, well, no, it wasn't Steve Jackson, it was the other Steve Jackson, Fighting Fantasy, and like Lone Wolf and Company. Anyway, like all the old, choose your own adventure type books. There was a lot of that to me in this without the actual story. That, I think, was the big minus of this book, and lots of Andrea's illustrations in this. There are rules for special encounters with monsters doing funky things, so there's a little bit of bookkeeping, not a whole lot. Traps, treasures, various saves. They do get into the RPG light option if you were going to play it with more than 2 people, and then symbols for keeping notes of your maps. And then we always, as with most Ganesha books, have a lot of photocopyable stuff in the back to help you with game aids. And there's a lot of this stuff actually online as well, so if you don't want to like how this one looks, chances are there's probably a pretty good version out there already on the internet as well. And then there's also a bunch of nice little PDFs of a lot of this stuff that's in little booklet form, so you can cut them out, fold them all over, and then you have the same information from all these tables in handy dandy travel size. I always carried a bunch of those in my school bags for whenever I was at conferences and had absolutely nothing to do, especially if it was a multi-day one, I was going to be stuck in a hotel room or something. like I said, I've got a copy at my in-laws' house in Japan. I have a copy. This copy, in fact, was at my desk at work. For really long rainy days and things like that, I used to like to whip this out. I've got plenty of maps tucked away at the bottom of my desk. So yeah, this book has given me hours upon hours of enjoyable adventuring. That, I love the procedurally generated stuff, and just, if you're like me with a very vivid imagination, there's a lot of that emerging narrative, as you kind of see everything happening in your mind's eye. I've heard stories of people actually going ahead, building the maps, and like going full on, like with miniatures on the table. I think 1/72 or smaller scale stuff works perfect for something like that. 15 millimeter, if you wanted to have really detailed maps and everything like that, could be a lot of fun. And actually, that brings me to my next point. This was just the beginning. And all of this stuff is actually available as PDFs as well. So if you don't want to actually have physical copies, I prefer the physical copies because I love to bring this stuff with me. And then I usually do print out a lot of it for handy dandy to go stuff as well. But there's so many supplements. And we're talking official, never mind all the unofficial stuff, but official supplements, there's a ton. And then since a lot of these books through Ganesha are kind of print on demand, and every now and then they offer up, coupons for this stuff, I always take advantage of that, and I'm always grabbing new ones. So they have a bunch of these cool little, and everything here is soloable. But some of these are neat, like the Knight of Destiny is a full-on Arthurial Grail quest, and it actually plays a little bit differently than the basic game. And so there's like a whole character sheet in the back. There is a purpose to the game. There is a little bit, like I said, how your character works, what they can do, what happens on various roles, and a lot of the stuff in this supplement actually replaces the things that happen in the base book. In addition to that, there are all sorts of fun things like Fiendish Foes. There's been a couple of these that actually add new monster tables to the game, so if you want to mix things up every now and then and really have some stuff. And I mean, yeah, it's not the most dense book, but then again, like the PDF was like a couple bucks. I mean, and I'd rather support independent game developers any day, but I like having this in a nice physical copy, and especially when there's coupons available through Lulu Press or whatever they've done in the past, I will absolutely take advantage of that. There's all sorts of actual adventures, like little modules. And again, this is all just for, your own individual party. So like stuff like Caves of the Kobold Slave Masters, I think was one of the very first ones they did. And I'll be honest, I didn't even grab everything out of my collection. And there's a ton of stuff that even I still don't own. But it has a whole story. You start with one map. And there's all kinds of events, just like the old Choose Your Own Adventure books. If you venture into certain spots, again, we have totally different supplemental charts to roll off of, things that can happen, what's going to happen to you. Then we had a bunch of these. No, this isn't one of the ones. Okay. Just another basic adventure for early on. I think this is one of the first wilderness ones, if I don't remember correctly. Maybe not. But, just the neat thing about a lot of these supplements is they added their own unique twist to the game. So if you do check some of those out, there's some special unique stuff there. We had a series of adventures for early on, the Gathering of the Four. And what's neat about this is it's a way to get you started with just a single character. Not only is the original Four Against Darkness just an individual soloable game, but with a party of four. Obviously, that's why it's Four Against Darkness. This changes things up and has you playing as just one character, full on in your typical choose your own adventure. I loved these. So, and then by the time you finish this, you actually are going to end up with this character joining the party and getting things started. Just another random adventure for early levels, getting you started. These also have maps. I don't want to spoil anything. We've had things like Caverns of Chaos, kind of like the other one, where we had interesting, more extra tables. This one's a little bit more meaty than the Fiendish Foes. Some fun stuff there. And as things start to get leveled up, we start to get into more and more interesting events. I can't find my Treasure Hunters of Charlemagne. That was a really cool one that kind of mixed up the rules. And speaking of mixing up the rules, then we get into crazy stuff like this, where we completely reskin the game. Alone Against Fear takes the premise of Four Against Darkness and totally changes it up into a survival horror game. And what's interesting about this one is there's like little subsets of how you play the game, like with what kind of bosses, what kind of minions are you going to fight. And rather than venturing through random dungeons, this one has you traversing through a town map. And then as you go, so you're going to have to deal with sanity, you're going to have to deal with injuries, you're going to have to deal with all sorts of supernatural stuff. This was a fun one. This one I suck at because you don't usually have a party. I've gotten wasted like on the second spot. There's also another one, I don't know where I put it, I didn't grab it. Four Against Mars, which gets a very pulpy 1950s sci-fi feel, if that's something that sounds interesting. Same premise. It's a lot like Alone Against Fear. It did come out before Alone Against Fear, where you're venturing through the base, if I recall correctly. There's even been other supplements that have you taking the entire game system to new levels and going into all kinds of craziness, like Four Against the Abyss or Four Against the Netherworld, where you're like trading in souls. This one's pretty wild and just substantially changes up how the game plays. You've got overworld maps. I forget which ones those showed up in. And again, tons and tons of new charts, new stuff, new abilities, new character types, new gods and goddesses for your clerics and priests, new character classes. There's just a ton of content out there if you really enjoy it. And honestly, at the prices of the PDFs, I wholeheartedly recommend this stuff, especially if you've got access to a nice printer that can just churn this stuff out. Totally fun stuff. Absolutely. This one, especially the original that started it all, gets a very high Lord recommendation from me if you're into those kinds of game books. Especially, I love having the physical format. And I'm a big fan of Ganesha stuff anyways. I think the rules are very streamlined, easy to understand, easy to adapt, and easy to learn as well as teach. Once you get the gist of this, it's really simple. And honestly, you can kind of start streamlining as you go and just roll with it. Literally with all the dice too. When I don't want to roll dice, I have it on my phone as well. So I've got all the notes. We're not gonna show anybody at work. This hardcore nerdiness right here. So yeah, I'll put a link down below if you want to take a look at Ganesha's site. There is tons of stuff there, and I mean, if you go to like War Games Vault as well, there's even more. I'm going to let you venture into those places at your own peril, or at least at the peril of your wallets and PayPal accounts, because it can get pricey really fast depending on how much of this stuff you want to start to acquire. But I love it. Definitely some fun stuff there. With that said, though, this has been High Lord Tamerlane with Obscurities and Miniatures, saying thanks for watching, and we will see you back here soon. Bye-bye.